Uh, Item 3.6, Little Hoover Commission report. I'm sorry, Marlene. Item 3.5, Vice Chancellor Garcia, state and federal legislative update.
Okay. Good afternoon, members of the board. I'm Chancellor Scott. I'm going to give you an update. You have received copies of your state legislative update, which is hot off the press. As you know, the legislative session adjourned for the year last Friday, actually last Saturday morning, about 2 a.m. Both the Senate and the House adjourned after a very busy last month of session. So what I'll do is cover the state legislative update, then I'll give you some information on what's going on at the federal level, and then what I think, if you'd like, I can go into the Little Hoover report as well, giving you an update on their activities. So it was a very busy session. We did not have budget deliberations going on at the same time during the last month of session, so that was actually very helpful. It allowed us to focus on legislation, although, as you may know, that we were pleased that one of the budget trailer education finance bills was approved the day before the end of session, extending the student fee trigger until the summer if in fact revenues fall short this December as determined by the Department of Finance. That's helpful to our students to not get hit with an additional $10 student fee semester in January if in fact the economy continues to decline. That was AB 32X in a special session, so that was addressed, and we were part of the many provisions in that bill, and I think Vice Chancellor Troy and Skinner, along with many other community college stakeholders, worked very hard in getting that addressed in the end of the last month of session. What I think for us, the good news is that even though there were many outstanding issues and a lot of political wrangling going on till the bitter end, community college issues were addressed earlier in the week, and I think that we had two major successes in particular. Your Board of Governors sponsored bills, AB 743, the Common Assessment Bill by Assembly Member Marty Block, was passed and sent to the governor. It's now sitting on the governor's desk awaiting a signature. And the other bill, AB 1056 by Assemblymember Fong, dealing with electronic transcripts, was also approved by both houses of the legislature. These were significant bills for us to move through the legislature because as they made their way through the legislature, we were able to talk about how critical these two particular measures are to our overall student success strategy. And I believe that there's a lot of support. The bills, for the most part, got almost unanimous support. There were a couple of no votes for the common assessment, and I believe that the no votes were because they thought it should be mandated. But what it is if you recall, we will be providing a common assessment. The Community College Chancellor's Office is required to establish a common assessment that's available statewide. And we're going to be able to, as a result of having one assessment, negotiate the best deal possible because of the per unit costs being reduced due to the volume. And then we would make these common assessments available to the colleges that we would assume would be happy to use one assessment, since this would be made available to them at no cost or very little cost. And so we expect full participation, and at this point, the feedback we've received from the administration has been positive. Finance has not opposed this bill, and we've met with the administration officials dealing with legislation, and that's of Jackie Roberts, and she has not expressed any concerns. So we're hopeful that that'll gain a signature. Same thing with the electronic transcript bill. This was also challenging because what we've said is if we get funding to fund the conversion from paper to electronic transcripts, then the community colleges will be required to, in fact, make that conversion. We have been able to secure some outside funding to cover the costs outside of the state general fund, and so we're very pleased that we were able to keep this bill intact and move it along. And so colleges will have the funding to make that conversion, and then we'll be able to enjoy the savings, the significant savings from converting from a paper transcript system to electronic transcript system. In addition, this bill and this program is going to be extremely important for students participating in the SB 1440 Transfer Guarantee program, because their transcripts can be sent out immediately. We'll put them in the queue earlier, and hopefully we'll give them full consideration so they can be accepted by not just their campus, but the program of their choice. So CSU has expressed very strong interest in the electronic transcript program as well.
Excuse me, one second. Was it foundation funding that was secured, or?
No, it was actually funding that was provided through the Assembly. Whenever there's a surplus fund due to
I remember this. That's right. I'm sorry. Member
Proposition
McDougal
140.
had a question, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, first of all, Marlene, congratulations to you and everyone else who was involved in getting those two bills passed. I think they are extremely important to the system. The question I have, because I think the bill is equally, if not even greater importance, is the Senate Bill 885, the public education accountability that will provide for a database on student records from K through 16, I assume. And I know this is one that we had great interest in and went all the way to the governor. Apparently was vetoed previously. But this is extremely important and has a considerable ability to save a lot of funding if we can get this in. So I see it's apparently supported, but was not acted upon. And whatever we can do to move it ahead, it would seem to be highly advisable to do so.
In response to that bill, it was put in the inactive file 1 or 2 weeks before the close of session, in large part because, and we did support it, and we do think that it's important to really highlight the importance of having a longitudinal data system from K-12 to 16. And but early indications were that the administration was not convinced that this was the type of system it would want to get behind at this point. I think that it's probably fair to say that this administration is really looking at data. The Governor Brown has made it clear that he's not a big fan of data, but I think that it's important for us to keep dealing with these issues and demonstrating the importance data has to help us make the best decisions possible, and to demonstrate trend lines and whether or not how they can demonstrate trend lines and whether or not we're moving in the right direction. I think that this is going to be something that we will be part of ongoing negotiations. I don't think it's something that will be left alone. And the author just decided that he needed more time to continue working with the administration on this issue.
It just seems that the cost benefits on this are tremendous, frankly. And it's hard to understand why there's not support for it.
I will say, though, behind the scenes, without the legislation, there has been a lot of good work, and Vice Chancellor Perry has been involved with the segments and in working on a JPA to develop intersegmental data systems. And I see Vice Chancellor Skinner is pulling up the microphone. Why don't you go ahead and explain some of the data?
Well, and perhaps Patrick would be the best to present this, but we have been in a series of negotiations over the last couple months, really, and the last month in particular, in which the closure of CPAC has really forced the issue of how is California going to store and collect and store higher education data, or is California not going to do that at all? And so essentially, the issue was broken down into two phases, and there was an immediate issue of what happens to the data the database that CPEC has already assembled. It's an asset that they had, and in November, when CPEC closes down, there's a very real question of where is that data going? And under federal privacy requirements, FERPA requirements, the data either needed to be destroyed or returned to the institutions that initially generated it, who had ownership over the data, or it had to go to some new agency. And so there was a negotiation that played out, and the legislature and the governor's office were both at the table there. And essentially, the solution was, for the short run, there was a compromise that Patrick, Vice Chancellor Perry was really central to negotiating with the other segments and coming up with a plan to store that the CPEC data and keep that in a safe spot so that asset remains intact. And the decision, really, the governor forced this, said that longer-term conversation of governance and what kind of a centralized structure do we want, that was a conversation he wanted to push out. And so he had the Simidian bill made into a 2-year bill. He asked Senator Simidian to hold that bill. And my sense from being in those negotiations was really, I think there is an openness on the part of the administration to consider what kind of a governance structure do we want over higher education, or at least over higher education data. What kind of accountability system makes sense there? They just weren't ready to have that negotiation right now. And I think it's quite clear from the legislature, particularly the Senate, they have a very strong interest in putting in a robust system of a centralized accountability system. So I think the politics, my read of it is, I think that negotiation plays out next year. I think there's a very real chance that we could come up with something that, is, again, a robust system. I don't know if it'll be exactly what was in that Simidian bill before, but it could be a strong accountability system and a strong repository of data. So, Patrick, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, that's pretty good accounting and summary of it. Essentially, the CPEC data that they held, which was just higher ed data, CSU, UC, and community college, it did not yet exist. It did not have K-12 or wage data in it yet, although we were working on that. The segments have agreed to essentially take the data back and then reconstitute that data on a server that is co-owned and co-shared and managed by all three of the segments in a common location amongst us. And we have a technology solution for keeping it FERPA compliant and yet still usable for state and segmental need.
Okay.
So we will be sending support letters to the governor urging a signature on the 2 sponsored bills, and we're hopeful that those will be signed into law. The next bills that I'd like to just touch on, just a handful of bills that I thought you'd be interested in. One is AB 684. This is by Assemblymember Block, and this is a bill that permits local community college districts to change from at-large district voting to area district voting. And this has been important for a lot of community college districts that have been found to be out of compliance with the California Voting Rights Act. So there's been a lot of pressure on them to switch their voting, their district, their area only, or from at-large to area only voting. And there are a number of colleges that have, there are about 25 districts that have already indicated that they'd like to make this change. So what this legislation did, and it passed, and it does have an urgency, so if it gets signed by the governor, it will go into effect immediately. This bill would allow the districts to pass a resolution allowing them to make this shift to area-only elections. But instead of having to go to a full election, which is typically the case right now, they would be able to come to the Board of Governors and seek approval from this body. So in January, if this does get signed into law, there will be a fair number of colleges. It would probably come in the form of one board item that would be seeking approval of this request. And the reason the timing is so critical is that these new district lines would have to be submitted to their local county voter registrar's offices by March 2nd. So this is something that will involve you, and this process is actually mirrored, this was mirrored after the the school board's process, that they can waive the local election and go to the State Board of Education to get approval to change the districting process.
Member Baca, you wanted to comment?
Not on this one.
Oh, okay. Can you wait till?
I'll come back.
Okay, great, go ahead.
So this has been this
this
was
one?
sponsored by the league and has, and actually had a lot of support, very few no votes. So I think we're hopeful that this goes through and it saves a lot of resources for the local districts.
So if the bill goes through and is signed, it's on the governor's desk now?
Yes.
What would be the circumstance that the board would not give the okay for that? Sounds like they'd all be granted.
Chancellor?
Well, I think this is, in some cases, if they don't do this, I think there's a possibility of a suit, frankly, because in many cases, when you had at-large elections, and let me point out one of the problems with an at-large election, let's say you had 7 trustees, you might have a area that is particularly, we'll say, minority area. But a minority of this background never gets on the board.
But that's not my question.
Well, I know, but I'm trying to explain why I think they may get sued if they don't do it. Why would they not want to do it?
No,
That was your question.
Why would our board not give an okay?
Oh, well, I misunderstood your question.
That's what I mean.
I was going to explain why
Right.
some boards
No,
who
it's-
already are elected that way may want to hold on
Yeah.
to their seat.
Well, no, and, just from, political, I guess, perspective, I mean, people do have philosophical differences on that. I suspect this board would be very supportive as a whole, but individuals certainly may have differences as to, does this disenfranchise voters or not? Or does this empower one group or not?
Okay,
So,
thank
And
you.
we won't be approving maps.
yeah.
I will say something after all. I guess it's conceivable that we would have people here who would not like the organization that's proposed.
Yeah.
And we might be challenged in some cases more so than others to
Right.
approve the change, I suspect.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
This is a very sensitive
Yeah,
matter.
it is.
It has to do with the election of trustees.
Yeah,
But the trend is in this direction,
Yeah.
I might say. And I think we could give some pretty serious thought to why this has some validity and why that it's probably more in the spirit of the Voting Rights Act to elect by areas. But, if a Board of Trustees themselves want to move in that direction, we would probably not be too inclined to turn it down, but I think Board Member Baca has a point. We may have some people out there in the audience who
Right.
don't exactly like what that particular board decided to do.
Thank you.
okay.
We may have people in the audience who want to do it, but the board, for whatever reasons, do not want to do it.
Right.
Yeah, but I don't think we have the right then to unilaterally decide. I
The
think,
initiative has to come from the local board,
Right,
apparently.
right.
that's right.
Correct. The local board must first pass a resolution.
Okay.
And then that request is submitted to the Board of Governors.
Okay,
So-
Vice Chancellor, please proceed.
Okay, just a couple of other bills. AB 194 by Assemblymember Bell. This is a bill that gives priority enrollment. We've been talking a lot about priority enrollment, and this bill would give priority enrollment to emancipated foster youth. These students in the past have been given priority enrollment through EOPS programs, but because those programs have been cut so drastically, a lot of them are, in fact, are not getting in to these programs that they get the priority enrollment. So this has had a lot of support and is on its way to the governor, and we supported it as well. SB 292, this was a bill that was of interest to a lot of our constituent groups. This is the technical cleanup bill to SB 1440, the transfer guarantee bill. It was gutted and amended the last week of session to permit Los Angeles to expedite the CEQA process to establish an NFL football stadium. So it's no longer transfer related, but in fact, another bill will be used as a vehicle to address any outstanding transfer guarantee issues that the author feels are necessary to address. We're working very closely with Senator Padilla and working to ensure that the implementation task force be permitted to continue its work and complete its work. And come January, if there's still some outstanding campuses that are not accepting community college transfer students through this program, I suspect that'll be an issue that can be addressed by this bill. In addition, he's been very, very interested in ensuring that community colleges also accept approved transfer courses from neighboring community colleges or any other community colleges in the state. So he's very interested in seeing us also accept units, courses. So those will be two major issues that if they're not addressed sufficiently over the fall, they could emerge in January. I think that the two last remaining bills I want to point out are the DREAM Act bills, AB 130 and AB 131. AB 130 has already been chaptered into law. This is the bill that would allow colleges, state-funded colleges and universities to provide private financial aid to AB 540 students. That's been chaptered. Now, AB 131, which was a little more controversial because it does have a fiscal impact, this bill was approved by the legislature and it's sitting on the governor's desk now, and this would permit students, AB 540 students, to in fact be eligible for state financial aid, state-funded financial aid, meaning institutional aid or BOG fee waivers or Cal Grant aid. Of course, this does not apply to any federal financial aid. So this bill was amended, and the governor has given early indications that he's supportive because the implementation date has been extended to 2013. I can't recall offhand. Linda, do you remember 2013? Think it's in the report, and that was the amendment that it appears the administration may be open to this bill now. So there's a strong chance that both those bills will go into effect.
You say AB 540 students, as I recall from my time there, what that means is that these are students who have spent at least 3 years in a California high school, correct?
Correct, and have graduated
And have
from California high school.
graduated, yeah.
And have some demonstrated evidence that they're going through the
Okay.
naturalization process.
Right.
So those are some of the high-level bills that I thought you'd be interested in. Of course, the report includes a whole array of bills that you may have questions about. I'm happy to answer any more questions about legislation, or I can move on to
Member Baca.
another part.
Yeah, thank you for your work on the common assessment and the electronic transcripts. Maybe you might remind us about how much money was attached to the electronic transcripts? And if we move on mandating that, is that something that's going to be really a good figure?
Yes, the cost is $5,000 per campus. It's a minimal cost, so we were able to get funding to cover that conversion cost. And the bill actually only requires the colleges to establish the e-transcript program. Of course, we believe that it would make full sense for the colleges to continue implementing this program since they would stand to save thousands of dollars on transcript costs.
So it's not requiring a full implementation or full?
It's
transcript.
requiring them to establish the e-transcript
I see.
program.
Okay.
Okay. I also wanted to point out that August 25th, the governor did issue an executive order establishing the California Interagency Council on Veterans. Given our strong interest and work in the area of veterans, this is something that I think will be an important council. The Secretary for the Veterans Affairs will be is directed to actually coordinate this council, and it'll include a number of government agencies as well as representatives from the community colleges, UC, and CSU. So the purpose of this council is to figure out how to best coordinate services to help veterans in their transition back to civilian life. So I think that that's it for the state report, and I can move on to the federal report if there are no further questions. Okay, and you also have your federal update. I think the big news that has come out of Washington, D.C. recently was the president's announcement last Thursday night to establish the American Jobs Act. This has a hefty price tag, $447 billion in spending and tax cuts to improve the current economic conditions of the country. And it includes a whole variety of proposals, but one of the proposals is a fund to modernize schools and colleges. Community colleges are included in that provision. And the community colleges would be, basically the plan would provide $5 billion to community colleges for modernization. New construction would not be permitted under these proposals, and it would be distributed in a formulaic basis to the states based on a number of student enrollment at their various institutions. This has a long way to go. It's the proposal. It hasn't been approved, and the Senate is expecting to take this up within the next month before the end of session. But it will have to go through it will have to go through the congressional process. And the president, of course, is trying to strike a bipartisan agreement because this is going to be challenging because he'd have to find a bipartisan agreement that would offset the cost of the new spending and the tax cuts that are embedded in this plan. So, of course, that's what we've been reading about in the paper, but there are some key provisions for us in the community colleges, particularly after the last presentation dealing with capital outlay and the need for renovation and modernization within our campuses. We have a significant backlog, and so that'll be something that'll be key for us to advocate for. We did submit some information on Friday. Vice Chancellor Troy provided some data on what some of our ready-to-go projects would include and how significant they are in the state of California. And they've submitted that as part of their advocacy proposal to talk about the pent-up need for renovation and modernization at the federal level, nationally. So we'll continue monitoring that very carefully. Now, the group that's going to also work on this and make decisions about these funds are the super committee that has been referenced, the group of 12 members who sit on the committee to decide how to find the $1.5 trillion in savings in the federal government. This group will also be looking at how to find those cuts and also find the funding to offset this particular plan. So there's a lot of heavy lifting that has to take place at the federal level, definitely charting new territory, but we continue to look for any opportunity we can at the federal level. Just a quick mention on the gainful employment regulations. There's been a lot of talk about gainful employment and whether community college education or proprietary college education results in gainful employment. I think it's fair to say that the proprietary college enrollment increases and financial aid, growth in financial aid participation has driven a lot of this discussion in Congress. But of course, we are one of the largest career technical education providers. Community colleges are the largest career technical education providers in the country. So we've been included in this whole movement to really evaluate whether or not students are gainfully employed after they complete their certificates or their degree programs in career technical ed. So there's two phases to gainful employment. The first phase was required July 1st, and this was that all community colleges or all colleges that offer career technical ed vocational programs are required to provide on their websites information about the occupations that programs to prepare students to enter, links to occupation profiles, just a whole array of information that helps students get the information they need to decide whether they're enrolling in the right career technical ed program. All of our colleges are in compliance with this, and now we're gearing up for the second phase, and that will be November 15th. The colleges will be required to begin reporting on very specific indicators. For example, they'll have to start reporting on repayment, whether or not at least 35% of former students are currently repaying their loans. Debt to discretionary income ratio, this is the estimated annual loan payment for a typical graduate who doesn't exceed a percent of his or her discretionary income. I mean, these are all technical matrices or indices that will be used to determine whether in fact colleges are meeting students' gainful employment needs. Those are going to be a lot more challenging to collect. I know that Vice Chancellor Michalowski and Vice Chancellor Perry have been working very closely together to try to help colleges collect as much of that data as possible at the system office through our existing data programs. And as I understand, a lot of progress has been made, and it will make it a lot easier for the colleges to comply. And I don't know if they'd like to add anything on that note, because it is a major undertaking for our colleges to have to comply with the second phase of the gainful employment reporting. Would you care to add anything? No. Okay. So that's something to watch for. I think there's just a lot of concern at the federal level as well as at the state level. You know, the states are watching what Congress is looking at very closely. So this is an important area for us to monitor. We're getting lots of questions at the state level about how we are collecting the information that they too can look at. Again, driven in large part by proprietary private institutions, but they're also interested in knowing more about community college students' gainful employment opportunities. So it's an issue that's going to stay with us for a while, and I think that at the state level as well as the federal level.
Any board members' questions? Member Malliman?
I don't know if you mentioned it, but why were the community colleges, the California community colleges, not required to report the job placement rates for students completing the program at this time? It says that on your paper.
Do you want me to address that, Marlene? The federal rules say that if you're not already doing it for some other purpose, you have a grace period before you have to do it. So colleges will be required to do it, but I believe they have a year before they have to include those elements.
Thank you.
And to add on that, there was concern that in the budget, one of the budget trailer bills, that the requirement that the state requires us to provide that information, and that would trigger the federal reporting requirement. But that area is a little murky still, and we're still trying to work that out. But it sounds like we do have the grace period. But we will eventually have to be in compliance with those reporting requirements.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.